It was midnight in Flensburg, May 7, 1945. President of Germany, Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded the last forces defending the last government of the Third Reich.
Within 8 hours, 4,000 prisoners were rounded up.
Their scattered armies had surrendered themselves independently to the French, British, and Americans, fearing total annihilation and the prospect of Soviet abuse. To this end, Dönitz wished to negotiate a total surrender for all of his forces, but to stall the Allies long enough for Eastern armies to make their way to surrender on the Western Front and escape the Soviets. They were running for their lives from people they'd spent the last 13 years believing to be their inferior, their slaves, their mortal enemy, into the arms of nations they would have been shot for even moving an inch toward a week earlier. Eisenhower, growing impatient and sensing he was being played, had expedited matters around 9 p.m. May 6th. He declared that if Dönitz did not surrender to all the Allies simultaneously and unconditionally by May 8th, artillery and full-scale assaults would continue.
As peace is signed with German General Jodl acting for the remnants of the Nazi government. Jodl, for a few hours, was the chief of staff of the German army, while the Führer's successor, Admiral Dönitz, was strangely missing.
Around 1:30 a.m., Dönitz capitulated. Before daybreak, the once triumphant German forces, conquerors of Europe and North Africa, were surrendering and deserting en masse in their own country. Dönitz would reflect on this ending as a final legacy of the last moments of Adolf Hitler's life. April 23rd. The German borders had been pushed back from the Caucasus to the streets of Berlin, from the Bay of Biscay to the River Elbe. The ranks of the German army were filled with old men, young boys, and teenage girls. The German Navy had no control over their own coasts. The Luftwaffe was less than 300 functional fighter planes. Hitler resided in the Führer bunker, the underground complex beneath the Reich Chancellery, since January 1945. It would be his last Führer headquarters. No longer did he command millions of men from secluded alpine retreats or armored trains. He was now relegated to an air raid shelter tucked away behind the Reich Chancellery, built for him by Albert Speer, shared by the entire Goebbels family, his military staff, and his household staff. He grew increasingly paranoid since the July 20th plot that nearly killed him in his previous Führer headquarters, the Wolf's Lair. Out of all the assassination attempts against him, the Valkyrie incident had left the most impact on him. Delivered in a briefcase bomb by a colonel he'd met and trusted personally, the blast had thrown him across the room and knocked him unconscious. His hand began to shake with stress. Though many historians speculate as to the cause of this tremor, Parkinson's or neurological injuries from the blast, testimony would date the onset after the bomb attempt. His closest confidants were under high suspicion. One by one, they fell out of favor or otherwise disappointed him. Hermann Goering hid in Austria. Hitler had named Goering his legal successor as Führer as early as 1941. Goering consulted with lawyer and Reich Chancellery Chief Hans Lammers on the exact wording of the 1941 decree. They concluded that Hitler's intent to remain and die in Berlin, with communications cut off imminent, constituted incapacitation, no different to a stroke or heart attack. Oppositely, his political rival Party Minister Martin Bormann shared the Führer bunker with Hitler and could also claim the opportunity himself. Goering sent Hitler a telegram requesting him to relinquish all command and to respond by the end of the night or be presumed incapacitated, thus activating the 1941 decree. Bormann presented the telegram to Hitler as a last-minute coup attempt, with Goering's true intentions unknown. Hitler immediately demanded Goering's resignation and rescinded the decree. Goering conceded. Hitler ordered SS men to attempt to arrest Goering, Lammers, and their staffs and households. Bormann and Goebbels would remain in the bunker past Hitler's demise. Heinrich Himmler, whose entire career in the party was dedicated to the protection, idolatry, and execution of the personal whims of Adolf Hitler, was far from Berlin on the night of April 23rd. After meeting Hitler on his birthday, Himmler left Berlin for northern Germany. Throughout the year, he had been secretly making preparations on negotiating a peace settlement with the Allies, but only to his own benefit. His ideal settlement would be for the UK, US, and France to cease hostilities and join a united front against the Soviet Union. This flew into the face of repeated Allied declarations that only total, unconditional surrender to all Allies was acceptable. Around the same time as the Goering incident, Himmler had relayed a written proposal for an armistice to Eisenhower through the Swedish consulate in Lübeck, acting as provisional Führer. On the night of April 28th, having no other link to the outside world, Hitler tuned in his radio to the BBC and learned of Himmler's secret negotiations for the first time. Against the protests of Eva Braun, he ordered Himmler's arrest and executed Himmler's liaison to the Führer bunker, Hermann Fegelein, Braun's brother-in-law, for attempting to escape to Switzerland. Over the next couple of days, Hitler allowed some of his entourage to leave the bunker and escape Berlin. In the early hours of April 29, 1945, Hitler married Eva Braun in a civil ceremony in the bunker with a reception right after. Sometime in the night, Hitler dictated his will to his secretary, Traudl Junge, widow to his valet Hans Junge, who was killed in Normandy. In actuality, there were two wills. One was political, the other was personal. His political statement was written in two parts. The first part is a monologue blaming the Jews and English for the war, pleading that he did not want to start the war, claiming he tried to prevent war while also claiming to be an empire, explaining why he didn't leave Berlin, and requesting his followers continue fighting for National Socialism to the death. This regurgitation of Nazism was followed by more concrete instructions in the second part. Goering and Himmler were purged from all party positions and membership and labeled as traitors to the German nation and as attempting to seize power. Hitler named replacements to fill their multiple vacant offices. He named a line of cabinet ministers and abolished the position of Führer, dividing its powers back to Minister of War and Chief of the Navy Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as President and Joseph Goebbels as Chancellor. All this would be effective upon Hitler's death. His personal will was written and delivered through Martin Bormann to Dönitz, with a short letter on Bormann's letterhead attached, providing the context of writing the will. Hitler details his intent to die with Berlin and how Eva Braun wishes to join him willingly. His personal property would go to the party. If the National Socialist Party no longer existed, the German state. If the state was no more, the disposition was up to the executor. The artwork, stolen as spoils of war, was to be displayed in his hometown in Austria. Proceeds from the property may be used to maintain the lifestyles of his siblings, his mother-in-law, his former secretaries, and those the executor believed to be closest colleagues. The executor named was Martin Bormann. In the afternoon of April 29th, Hitler received word of Mussolini's capture and death at the hands of an angry mob. Mussolini and his mistress were gunned down by submachine guns, and their bodies were mutilated and paraded around Milan. Fearing being made into spectacle or failing to shoot himself, Hitler requested an SS doctor test the cyanide ampules supplied to the whole bunker on his German shepherd, Blondie. The latter failure had been the case with Ludwig Beck in the Valkyrie incident and Ernst Röhm in the Night of the Long Knives. Around 1 a.m. April 30th, Field Marshal Keitel admitted to Hitler that the reinforcements Berlin was expecting were halted and cut off by the Red Army. That night, Hitler bid farewell to his remaining staff and associates in the bunker. He briefly thanked them, and many later reported that he appeared calm and determined. General Helmuth Wiedling, commanding officer of Berlin, reported that based on their usage and inventory, German forces in Berlin would run out of ammo before dawn, and that all fighting would most likely cease in the city before dusk on May 1st. He made another request to Hitler for a breakout. Instead of a vocal rejection, Hitler turned away and remained silent. Around 1 in the afternoon, Hitler gave Wiedling explicit permission to escape the encirclement. At lunch, Hitler, his secretaries, and personal cook Constanze Manziali shared a lunch of noodles and tomato sauce, a luxury for most of Germany at the time. Around 2 p.m., the bunker occupants were assembled for Hitler and Braun to bid a final goodbye to the staff, Bormann, Goebbels, and their families. At 2:30, Hitler and Eva Braun retired to their private study. There, they both ingested cyanide capsules. While Braun would die quietly, Hitler shot himself in the head with his Walter PPK to ensure death. Upon sensing the gunshot by sound and smell, bunker staff entered the room and found the two seated on a sofa. The staff wrapped them in a spare rug and carried them to the Reich Chancellery garden. They were doused in gasoline, but the staff had difficulty setting them afire. A valet would return with a roll of paper which Martin Bormann used to light the two on fire. The blood-stained rug would join them. Over the course of 4 hours, SS guards would continue dousing the two in gasoline and resuming the fire until their remains collapsed to touch. In this time, the bunker occupants were officially informed. People made their way out of Berlin through the breakout. At 4 a.m. the morning after, General Hans Krebs, one of the bunker's occupants, approached the Soviet lines under a flag of truce. Being fluent in Russian from the period of Soviet cooperation with the German army in the 30s, Krebs arranged an audience with General Vasily Zhukov and requested to enter into peace negotiations. Zhukov was then informed of Hitler's death. Hitler had only been dead 10 hours. Within 5 minutes of the start of the meeting, Stalin was informed of the death and dispatched Smersh operatives to the front in order to get independent confirmation. By radio, the German people were informed nationwide.
On the final lap of their drive on Berlin, Russian troops under Marshals Zhukov and Rosakovsky.
Within 2 days, Red Army infantry captured the Reich Chancellery and the bunker below.
The foe must be wiped out building by building, street by street.
They would find Krebs's body, the Goebbels family, and the bodies of other National Socialists who chose to follow Hitler's example.
The number 2 Nazi has the blood of thousands on his hands, and for that he will have to answer.
Goering would surrender to the US Army and would be convicted at Nuremberg for authorizing the Holocaust. Himmler would surrender to British forces and die in custody under mysterious circumstances. Throughout the decades, many speculate about the possibility that these events as described never happened, that Hitler had survived and stayed in Argentina, Soviet prisons, Spain, or even the moon. The final hours of Adolf Hitler end a terrifying chapter in the story of humanity. In it, mankind learned the outcome of blind obedience.
Horror camps, torture hells, staffed by hand-picked sadistic fiends who had at their disposal
The human potential for
weapons,
evil.
such as this beheading board, to slice the last spark of life from broken bodies. Currency, bullion, and art treasure.
And the horrors of National Socialism.
5 years of war. Currency from all the European countries in Reichsbound containers. $2 million in American money also were found. Allied officials will take charge of the treasure until it's
The toll of human death and suffering exacted by this person is unparalleled in its scope and motivations. Never before had the assembly line been used to annihilate entire populations without remorse. However, in this chapter, mankind did learn its ability to unite for common defense. Its resolve to unconditionally fight National Socialism, and its capacity to change.